Hey everyone, welcome to the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast, the ultimate blueprint for self-love and inner peace. I'm your host, Danielle Van. As a cognitive behavioral therapist, life coach, meditation teacher, and author, I've spent my life studying and learning from the stories that make us human. It's my passion and goal to help you shift your mindset and create a lifelong revolution. Okay, here's a hard fact. Sometimes it's not about you. Many of our life's problems would be solved if we stopped taking everything personally. So today, you and I are taking a one-on-one deep dive into how to stop taking everything as an attack, taking everything personally, how to disconnect, what it sounds like when we are taking things the wrong way, and how to change the rhythm of that personal connection to every single moment that happens. So buckle up. This is a tough conversation for many. The Get Your Life Together Girl podcast starts right now. Okay, where are my people that wear their emotions on their sleeves? Listen, I'm one of you. I get it. We need to talk though, because if you are someone who can have their feelings hurt very easily, we often are prone to taking things a little too personally. We don't stop. We don't evaluate. We really take responsibility for things that do not belong to us. And it's important that we stop, because a lot of times the people that really take everything personal struggle with things like negative self-talk. There's a lot of trauma, and so they always feel like there's a lack of emotional support. And we tend to be really connected to feelings of negativity and feelings of humiliation, guilt, blame, and shame. There's poor self-esteem. Usually there's some kind of anxiety that's present, whether it's social anxiety or an anxiety disorder, or just that sense of embarrassment. There's stress and fatigue, that sensitivity of really not being able to control your emotional responses. It's something that we definitely want to get out of. And let's talk about how. I want to give you some signs that you may be taking things a little too personally. I want to tell you what it sounds like, what it feels like, and let's talk about how to stop. Let's talk about how to stand in our own emotional power and not take responsibility for things that do not belong to us. I know I've been guilty of this. I know you have too. Maybe it's a constant in your life. I know many people who've suffered a lot of trauma will take things very personally because they feel that at the root of everything is them, and therefore there must be a problem with them themselves. That's a natural leap, right? It's a normal jump when people come into session and they have that experience, that feeling of themselves. I often try to get them to look at situations, people, relationships from a different viewpoint and ask for some clarity. Is this your perception? Or is this really how someone feels towards you? That is something that is a very humbling experience, because we have to look at the connection, and then we have to look at the overwhelm. And then we also have to look at the positivity in it all, because when our feelings are hurt over and over and over again, there's something that happens, and it's resiliency. There's some emotional resiliency that happens, and that sounds a little strange, but it's true. The key to breaking from this cycle includes understanding your worth, separating facts from your perception of things, and fostering an open line of communication with people and yourself. So let's talk about some of these things, the causes behind why we take things personally, how they really show up in our behavior. When someone doesn't think highly of themselves, or they have had all of these negative experiences or trauma, we impact ourselves through a few behavior pieces. Our mindset goes through a tunnel of negativity of frequent misconceptions and misinterpretations in order to keep ourselves safe from more trauma. It's very important to understand that the way we show up, the way we think, controls everything. What we think, we see. What we take in, we feel, and that becomes our thought process. So about those signs. Common experiences when it comes to taking something personally sounds and feels like this ruminating critique that happens. If you keep replaying someone's critique or nasty words or thoughts over and over again in your head, it's a huge sign that you're taking something personally. A lot of times people react in moments and they lash out, and it isn't even about us. You're not working hard enough. What does that mean? Is that me? Tell me some examples. We're going to talk about those discovery questions that you've heard so many times, what those sound like when critiques come in, how to get underneath the surface. Another common experience is our lingering thoughts. If we're still thinking about an interaction with someone many hours, if not days later, it's very likely that we have dug our heels in and taken something on. Remember, not everything that happens has to have personal responsibility to it. There's also a sign of physical tension, feeling your body get hot when they're in your presence, feeling that nervousness, that sense of, that tension, or even having that when your phone goes off and they're calling or they're sending a text. The physical symptoms is also a big thing that we want to check in and separate fact from interaction. We want to foster the ability to not take everything so personally. It's a hard one when we experience these things that push our boundaries and we have to work to maintain them, and we're not sure where to place responsibility and where to put our feelings. But if we're in a space that we do not set or maintain boundaries as a rule, it's very likely that we're going to take things too personally because there's no metrics in which to measure. If you depend on approval of others to make you happy, I guarantee you that there are times where taking things too personally is 100% present in your life. If you apologize unnecessarily and are a people pleaser, guess what? You likely take things too personally. I have a rule with people that come into session with me. I immediately see them say things like, I'm sorry, when they cry, or they apologize for things that are so minuscule, or they apologize for reactions to things that they shouldn't apologize for. And I know that they have the ability to look at situations and take full ownership of things that don't belong to them. And in that case, I do not allow them to apologize. And if they do, I point it out, right? Like, sorry, we don't say sorry here. We're not saying sorry for our feelings. We're not saying sorry for our tears. We're not saying sorry for this moment. What can we learn? What went wrong? What went right? Rumination holds us in these critical patterns of conversation for far too long, and then we apologize to try to keep ourselves safe and to get out of it. We don't apologize unnecessarily. We don't people please our way, but if you do, you're likely to take things too personally. If you're afraid to say no to request or tell someone that you want to decline, you might be someone who takes things too personally. You're owning someone else's feelings when they're not yours to own. If you believe all harsh comments, whether directed to you or not, are about you and you take them to heart, you 100% take things way too personally. The other thing is defending things really quickly. This is a safety mechanism that a lot of people have. I know that many people I work with have this, and I always try to break them of it, at least bring their attention to it. And it's that if they see something and it is a threat to their own personal self-esteem or worth or feelings, they will immediately put a stopgap up and say, that's you, that's not me. And that's sort of a reverse way of taking things too personally. It's trying to put up this wall in hopes that people stay away so they get defensive or angry really easily, and they mistake their behavior. Like, nope, I didn't do that. I wouldn't do that. There's no personal ownership. And yet in the background, in their head, they are going through this metric of, oh my gosh, that was me. And they feel guilt and shame and blame. But then when talking about it, they put up the front wall first and then break it down really easily. So if you're doing that, understand that that is something that tells on you. Okay. This is a big one. This is a huge one. I see this every day, all day long, and it's for you moms out there. You dads too, but moms. Oh my goodness. Ladies. All right. You tend to own the mistakes of your children, full stop, right? You look at the upbringing, you look at the things that you've provided, and you're like, oh, I messed that up. Or your child does something that is against what you taught, and you take that on like that's a personal failure of yours. You're taking it too personally. Our kids are here through us, not for us. Our kids are here to have their own learning patterns. They're here to make mistakes just like you are. They're here to learn just like you are. And all of this comes together saying that when we have this experience, we have prolonged negative emotions, prolonged negative moods. It interferes with our problem solving. It interferes with our ability to return back to center. Like I said in the beginning, we can have anxiety, even depression. It limits our effectiveness in mindfulness. And any time that we look at rumination, right, where we're connecting to something over and over and over again, we know that people have high levels of cortisol in their bloodstream because it worsens our stress response. So even though I just gave you a bunch of things that tell us why taking things personally is bad and how it impacts us, there is this weird little moment that I want to mention, and there is a benefit of taking things personally. I mentioned it just a few minutes ago, and it sounds a little surprising, but when we take things personally, we build emotional resiliency as well, because we have to deal with our emotions. We have to deal with how we feel. And so we build this emotional awareness about ourselves, and we begin to build some resiliency. The other part of this too is by taking things personally, we actually have a roadmap for our boundaries. We may not have them in place, right? Because we're taking things too personally, but we actually have the ability to say, hey, you know what? That experience happened and it doesn't work for me. So therefore I should take that and create a boundary around it. It equips us with the knowledge so that we can modify our behavior, be willing to have conversations with other people so that they understand how to treat you. It really helps us understand how to have deeper, meaningful relationships with others based on what was hurt. It's really interesting. It's a humbling experience to have your feelings hurt from time to time because you learn how to overcome that feeling, because later it becomes the resiliency, the strength that you put in place for another time. So how do we stop taking things so personally? Let's dig in there. I'm going to give you some guidelines to help you make some small changes, 7 ways, in fact, to stop taking things so personally. And the first one is to challenge your assumptions. Challenge what you are perceiving when you feel hurt. When you notice yourself becoming bothered by actions or words, take a moment and challenge the thought. Those are the discovery questions I was talking about. Here they are. Was this done to me? This is important. Was this done around me? Was this done to me? Was this done on purpose? Did someone say something purposefully to hurt me? Was it a joke that I took too far? What is it? Is there a chance that I'm being too sensitive? Now, that's a hard question because I never want you to devalue your emotional response, and that can tiptoe into that. What I mean by that is, am I experiencing a mindset at the moment that I'm really heightened in my emotions? And if so, I might be oversensitive to a moment that has nothing to do with the original sensitivity. If that's the case, is there a chance that I'm being too sensitive or oversensitive and it has nothing to do with this particular moment? Another question is there another way to perceive the moment? So often we get into our moments and we take on the experience based on how we're feeling, a past experience, and the perception of the person providing the experience or we're having the experience with. And we have to look at that person's form of operation. Is someone joking all the time and that joke turns into hurt feelings? That may be another explanation, and maybe it's not personal. Maybe it's not about you. Maybe that's not the best person for you to hang out with, right? Or to have a close relationship with because your feelings get hurt too easily. Another question, have I overreacted in the past to something similar to this moment? Because if you have, your brain has marked this moment, this feeling, and said, oh, this is not safe for you. This feels bad. And in that time, we are triggered, I'm putting air quotes around it, into that moment saying, oh, I'm reacting to something in the past. And in this moment, I need to do a little work around it. And in that, you're challenging your assumptions. And then ask yourself, is this feeling I'm having likely to pass on its own? Because if it is, you may not need to be connecting to it at this level. I mentioned trauma earlier. Trauma often has us in an overreaction until we work to heal that inner wound. There's a reason behind our interactions. A trauma history, something that you're self-conscious about, always shows up in behavior and thought processes, which then shows up in our emotional body and our actions. So look at therapy. Look at why this insecurity arises. Look at how you find yourself reacting in moments that are very similar. It goes back to those discovery questions. And take a look. Maybe CBT is something you want to try. That's what I practice. Or NLP, or DBT, or ACT. We have all of these acronyms that you can just dive into. But maybe there's something that you need to try, or group therapy, or even just doing some deep journaling to help you get into a space that you can dive into some deeper awareness. Also want you to do some improving work for your self-esteem. When your self-esteem is low, you're much more likely to take things personally due to this over-assumption that others don't think of you very highly. And really that comes down to your self-perception. So working on your self-esteem can help decrease those negative reactions. Increasing your self-esteem can help improve your mental health, protect against those nasty influences of that inner voice that's not healthy, and help you get into a space that you are able to lock in and key in. Self-esteem is so important, and it's first based in safety and trust, and that's within the self. So you have to get curious. And that's the next thing, is get curious about the insecurities that arise when your feelings get hurt. What is being exposed? Ask yourself another round of discovery questions. What does that statement or that feeling or this situation that occurred say about me as a person? If someone says, oh my God, you're so dramatic, and you hear that so often, so many people say that, what is that saying about you? What is that saying about your reactions, the perception that you're putting out there? And then ask yourself, is this opinion about me or is it about them? Does it even matter to me? whose behavior is really the problem here? Them or me? I always ask that. Like, is this my responsibility? Have I done something? Because if I have, I need to clean it up. Or am I responsible for their behavior? Hell no, I'm not. I'm not going to own something that doesn't belong to me. And you have to go through this metric. I also want you to ask, do I tend to get sensitive about this one thing? If someone came up to me and said, you have runner's legs, I would say, oh, great, you're saying my thighs are fat, right? That would be a sensitivity to me because I spent many years thinking that. And while that's not true, old patterns die hard, right? So look at it, get curious about your insecurities and see what's happening when they arise. I also want you to look at what is the worst that this could mean. If someone is trying to hurt your feelings, it's their issue, right? It's just them. But what does that mean for you? Did that person do something purposefully? Did that person create something that was meaning to hurt you in a negative way? A lot of times it's the truth. That's what they're trying to do. But what does that mean for you? Is this the worst thing that could happen? We often try to convince ourselves that people don't like us, that we are unlikable, that we are bad. And that is what the worst thing could happen really is, right? Like that's awful to think of. Like, I'm just not a good person. No one likes me. That's worst case scenario. Is that true? Or are you just not for everyone? Are you just not for that one person? I need you to think about that. When times where I've had conflicts, and I actually had one recently, and I realized that my feelings were getting hurt over a set of situations. It was a long build. And I realized, you know what? I don't even like the person that is causing the problem to begin with. That's one. And two, why do I even care what their opinion is? Because I don't like them, right? So think about it that way. What's the worst that could happen if you really broke it down? The worst is hanging out with people you don't like, right? Feeling okay with letting go and taking on what does this mean for me gives you the freedom to not have to put yourself in awkward situations dealing with people that you don't want to be around, right? So think about it that way. And allow your feelings to come and go. That's the next thing. Feelings do not hang around forever. Let your negative feelings come in, accept them, sit with them, be okay with them, acknowledge the discomfort. For just a second, it's a sensation. Remind yourself that it is going to pass, and the longer you push it away, the longer it stays. So if you don't ruminate, keeping the cycle going, you acknowledge it, you welcome it, it's going to find a pattern out of your body, out of your existence, out of your thought process. And so instead of minimizing, lean in hot, right? Be able to do what you need to do. And then the last piece of that is look at the positives. Being a highly sensitive person is actually a positive trait sometimes. It shows you how to interact and develop these deeper relationships with people because you allow this place of being vulnerable, of having compassion, showing love, giving yourself the ability to really dive in and go below the surface level. That is a positive. Allow yourself to really be in that. It's very excellent. And when you suffer from things like, social anxiety, it's very difficult to get into those relationships where you allow yourself to go deeper. And so if you realize that my sensitivity is a superpower, well, then you can begin to really feel good about every interaction, even those that are hard. Let's also talk about some other quick hit ways, right? Like, how do we get into a space where the reaction isn't, oh, that hurt? And that piece is to practice emotional resilience. You can come up to someone and say, hey, you know what? That really hurt. I didn't care for that. Or do you mind if I ask you about X, Y, and Z, right? What did you mean by that? That allows your emotions to come back to center. It allows you to know that you have the emotional strength to lean in. So ask questions. The other thing that you can do is to give people the benefit of the doubt. Again, sometimes it's just not about you. I say this a lot of times to people as they go through all of these experiences, and it hurts. It sucks to hear. But it feels like it's about me. Sure, it does, of course, because you're in the room. But that doesn't mean that it's directed at you. Sometimes there are misunderstandings, and I promise you, people don't think about us as much as we like to think that they do. They have their own worries. They have their own issues. Just ask clarity. Ask for it. Give me some clarity. What did you mean? And then try to stop worrying about every situation. It's not your job to fix every moment. It's not your job to get into a space that you have to try to create a path in every environment. Relax. It's okay. You can stop worrying every second. You don't have to worry about what so-and-so thinks. And you can give yourself some credit for your own greatness, for your strengths. And then try to practice mindfulness to stay present, to relieve the stress. You can put your words on paper. It's called journaling. You hear me say it over and over and over again ad nauseum, right? But just put your thoughts on paper. It's okay. Practice positive affirmations with the self. I have a whole course on how to use your brain chemistry to use positive affirmations. I'm going to put it in the show notes so that you can link right out to it, or you can go to my website. It's on the homepage, right? It's very inexpensive. It teaches you how to use those positive affirmations in conjunction with your brain chemistry to make them work. I promise you, it helps you with your emotional regulation, and then you stop taking everything so damn seriously. And again, ask for help. Like everything, if you can't do this yourself, and sometimes we can't, make an appointment. Ask yourself, how can I improve these feelings? How can I stop taking everything so personally? How can I get into a space where I don't have to feel regularly upset? I don't have to listen to someone's comments and know that they meant to hurt me, because that's not always the truth. It's normal for people to feel like they are a target every now and then. It's not normal to feel something every single interaction. And if that's the case, the relationship's not good. That's not the relationship you want to be in. It either needs work or it needs to be done. That's just the truth. Or you need to find a way to stop feeling that upset because it's impacting your mental health. It's impacting your emotional health. It's important to learn how to recognize your reactions and put them in proportion to the moment. It's called perceived sight. How am I perceiving this moment? What's the vision of this moment? If you're experiencing things like abuse, that is not what we're talking about. I'm talking about having these hurt feelings where you're actually feeling like these minor criticisms or these minor things are disrupting your everyday. If that's the case, you're taking things too personally, and it's time to stop. There's something else I want to really bring forth, and it's practicing self-compassion. We want to acknowledge our feelings, right? No matter where they come from, whether they're justified or not, they're there, and we don't want to disregard that. And so practice and acknowledge your feelings, but don't dwell on the negativity of them. Use them as guides. They're never facts, but use it as a guide. What do I need to do? What should I feel? What do I want to feel like? And give yourself the experience to shift your focus towards growth and learning instead of these little digs, these 1,000 cuts, these thousands of things that just set on top of one another. And let go of the control. The control always gets us, right? You cannot control the way other people show up. Their words, their actions, their reactions, Nope, none of them are yours. All you can do is control how you show up. So focus on that. How can I focus on my communication? How can I breathe through this moment, ask for clarification instead of assumption? And how can I shift my perception to consider the source and reflect on the moment? Insecurities will get you. Worst case scenario will get you. Assumptions will get you. Expectations, oof, that'll get you too. Ask yourself, what is most important to me? And how do I want to show up in this moment? Now, one last piece to all of this that is so important, because I hear some of you booing as you listen. Some of you have already left. You're going to come back later. But I want you to hear me, please, because there is something else to all of this. For those of you who are true empaths, if you don't know if you're an empath or not, there is a whole episode on it. I will also link it in the show notes. Empath burnout is a real thing. After so many years of putting up with other people, putting them first, overgiving, people pleasing, being hurt, you become exhausted. You become drained. You become indifferent. You take on the sensitivities at a higher level. And guess what? That's because you have gotten into a place where you just are burnt out with feeling so much all the time. And so when people try to return and treat you better or to give to you in a different way, you are so burnt out with the experience that, one, you may not even genuinely care anymore. That's very plausible, right? I just don't care anymore. You've hurt me too much. This is just it. Or as they try to come back in, you don't believe them because the evidence is different than what you have seen. All of these things are very normal. It's very possible to change. And we have to remember that with a little self-awareness, everything changes. What we focus on becomes what we feel, what we experience. And so ask yourself, what do I want to feel? How do I want to live my experiences and my relationships? Do I really want the approval of others to make me happy? Do I want to go around apologizing all the time? Do I want to have anxiety disorders and poor self-esteem and live in my childhood trauma and the negative self-talk and self-stress and fatigue? And, you're exhausted by that, aren't you? Because I am. And so how can we move forward? How can you learn to live in a different way that allows you to not take responsibility for things that do not belong to you? Start practicing the things that I gave you, and I promise the shift happens. It's a practice. It's a tool like everything else that you come here for. And that means what? That it takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. Begin to filter. And if you take one thing away from this conversation, let it be this single question. Is this about me? Because if it's not, it sure as hell does not deserve another ounce of your attention. Is this about me? If the answer is yes, go deeper. Why? Why is this about me? Go deeper from that answer. How do I correct it? Why am I connecting this way? If the answer is no, let it go. Sometimes it's not about us. And when we learn that, when we have some ownership in that, it's an essential step into getting your life together. Thank you so much for listening to the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast. If you've enjoyed these tips for bettering your life, please feel free to hit notifications to be alerted each week when a new episode drops. Also, if you want more inspiration, follow me if you're not already on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Clapper, Threads, and Insight Timer, where I'm beginning to do weekly lives on Monday morning. I hope you'll join me there. There's a link in the show notes, as well as visiting my website for my blog, merch, courses, and so much information, upcoming events. You can find that at www.getyourlifetogethergirl.com. Thank you so much for being such a beautiful part of this community. Until next time, be kind to yourself and others.